Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tom Vander Rostein, and I serve as the president of the Louisville Forum. We meet on the second Wednesday of every month at Vincenzo's Restaurant. The Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan public issues group founded in 1984. The Forum hosts debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. Although we may take up issues that have a national interest, we try to highlight the local perspective. For more information on Louisville Forum, our programs, or to make reservations, please visit our website at louisvilleforum.org. Our topic and speakers today are Midterm Election Roundup. What's next? The 2018 midterms was a highly charged election with an unusually high voter turnout. The Democrats gained control of the House of Representatives, and the Republicans solidified their control of the Senate. Close elections for governor in several states were also on the national stage. This election and its results has now set the stage for the 2020 national election, which our speakers and moderator will discuss today. I'd like to introduce each of our speakers, and then we will start the program. Ben Self. Ben is the chairperson of the Kentucky Democratic Party. He grew up in Lexington, studied electrical engineering and computer science at MIT, graduating with a bachelor's degree in 1999 and completing a subsequent master's in 2000. Ben did consulting work and volunteered for the Howard Dean presidential campaign. After that, he was one of 4 co-founders of Blue State Digital. Ben served as the Democratic National Committee's technology director from 2005 to 2009 and helped support the 2008 presidential campaign of President Barack Obama. Ben has also worked with former Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd. In 2010, Ben sold his stake in Blue State Digital and moved back to his hometown of Lexington, Kentucky. He then founded a brewery, West 6 Brewery. Ben is a native of and currently lives in Lexington with his wife, Becca, and their 2 children. J. McCauley Mac Brown is also known as Mac, serves as the chairman of the Kentucky Republican Party. He served as a vice president and director of business services at Brown-Forman Corporation. He also served with he's been with Brown-Forman since 1972. He's been a director of Stockyard Banks and Stockyards Bank and Trust Company, Inc. since July 24, 2015. He holds positions with the Board of Overseers for the University of Louisville, the Kentucky Historical Society, Louisville Library Foundation, Fraser History Museum, and president and CEO of the Filson Historical Society, and the Board of Advisors for the University of Louisville School of Business. Mr. Brown has a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration degree from Georgetown University and received a Master's in Business Administration degree from George Washington University. He and his wife Eileen have 4 children, Christopher, Suzanne, Jennifer, and Catherine. Scott Reynolds will be our moderator today. He is an anchor at Evening News at WAVE 3 News. He's been at the station since 1996. Scott now anchors the 5, 6, and 11 p.m. newscasts. Scott grew up on a dairy farm near Zumbrota, Minnesota, about an hour from Minneapolis. He was an all-conference baseball player. He attended and earned a degree at Brown Institute in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Scott then turned his sports ambitions to broadcasting. After college, he handled a play-by-play at a radio station in northern Idaho. He worked several radio jobs and then moved into television news at Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He won an award for investigative reporting and moved on to Las Vegas and eventually back home near at WCCO in Minneapolis. Scott is married and has 5 children, Haley, Connor, Tyler, and twins Matthew and Logan. Scott does extensive work with the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation, the Red Cross, and other charities. He's been honored with an Emmy as a Best News Anchor. Please welcome Scott Reynolds as our moderator today.
Glad to be here. Done this a few times, and it's so fun to see all of you again. Want to start out with Ben, Democratic Party. I got a little something for you. That's a box of ballots, if you could get those down to Broward County.
I hope they're Republican.
Found those in a closet. No rush. They'll take them till January, I think. 72% Nelson. That should fly when they look at them. But and Mac.
Yes, sir.
The Brown family, GOP. That stands for Gone Overboard Politically in the Brown family. But here he is, and we all love him. So. You got to have some love and laughter and all the tension of the political season, and get along. And I hope that's the atmosphere here today, and I know it will be. I'm going to throw the first question out, and that has to do with: is all politics local? We had two great veterans in the election, one in the 6th district with Amy McGrath, and then one in the Arizona Senate race that had served our country great, and yet they lost. So sometimes you think you've got a good candidate on paper for your party who's really strong and doesn't win. So I'll go to you first, Ben. How much of it is local and how much of it is the national tide and the tension between the parties right now in the political climate?
Thanks, and thank you all for having me today. I think it's a really good mix of the two in almost all cases. I mean, obviously, what we saw around Kentucky and nationally was that this election was absolutely a referendum on Trump, President Trump, and here in Kentucky, even more so on the Governor Bevin. And so, I think, the 6th Congressional Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath ran, an absolutely fabulous campaign. And although she came up just a hair short, she did swing that district 13% from the results in 2016. There's not a single, we're going to still count the votes, as you so pointed out, nationally, but I think nationwide we're going to end up with somewhere north of 35 House seats, a majority for the Democrats that swung. And I think there's not a single one of those that was more than a Trump plus 10 district nationwide. And so, for her to move that needle and to as a first-time candidate to really swing that race by such a large percentage, the next closest was actually another fellow Kentuckian, Joe Cunningham, down in South Carolina. And that was a Trump, I think, plus 12 district. But that was a case where it was a Mark Sanford's former seat, and so there wasn't even an incumbent to battle against. So, I think we all were very inspired and excited by the campaign that she ran, and I know that she's going to continue to be, whatever path she decides, an important person in Kentucky politics for many years to come.
Matt?
Well, yeah, I would say it's a mixture of whether politics are local or national. There's quite a bit about what Ben said I agree with. President Trump had an effect here, and so that's a national effect here, and certainly in our urban areas. A lot of people, and I'm included in this, don't like his rhetoric, don't like the way he speaks, but we like his policies. And that's one of the big things that people are thinking and looking through are the policies that are happening. But the rhetoric hurt us. It hurt us in the urban areas without question. We lost a couple of good people in our urban areas, especially here in Louisville. But when you talk about local, one of the big things we did was make it local. We helped people understand what Governor Bevin and the legislature's policies are, and how the fact that the pension crisis is such a crisis, and the fact that we need to pay for it so that the teachers have something to retire on. And we reminded them of the programs that are happening. We reminded them of the economic growth and development that we're having, and that tax reform is critical to draw business into this state. So it's helping them understand the vision, the local vision of building Kentucky through economic development, drawing in more taxpayers into this state so that we can generate revenue to really address the education problems we have and the opioid problem. So is it local? Not 100%. It's a mix. And I think the reason why we won on Tuesday is very simple. We helped the voter remember about the local issues.
Let's go to questions now. I know a lot of you have submitted them, so. All right. I was wondering if there were more possible, do you think because of the tension and the heat that there is right now in the political climate that a lot of people, and I know I waited in line 30 minutes, they had one machine at my polling station, so it wasn't a matter of getting the ballot, it was a matter of waiting in line for a half hour to put it in a machine and there was no place to mark it. I wonder if more people, because of maybe the crowds or maybe the political climate, just marked party, and that helped Democrats here locally, maybe Republicans somewhere else, Mac, what are your thoughts about that? Maybe people just said, I'm voting party this time.
Party line. I don't know. It's hard to get into the voter's head in that regard. I know some people who will mark party line, and I think over in the Lexington area, you can hit party and then you can go down individually and change it. But it sort of automatically fills the ballot real easily and quickly. So there's a certain amount of convenience factor there. I think, given what's going on in the environment today, though, I think people are thinking through. There were a lot of ballot splitting that went on, and if you think about the race in the 6th district, that was a very, very tough race. Amy McGrath was an excellent candidate. She did all the right things, and quite frankly, the enthusiasm that she had going into the election was phenomenal. But a lot of people also decided to vote Republican. They may have voted for her for Congress and then turned around and voted for their local Republican candidate or the Republican senator. So I heard there was more straight party voting, but I'm not sure there was. I think there was probably plenty of split tickets.
Yeah, I still think a lot of that analysis is yet to be done, but I do think it highlights a huge problem we have in Kentucky, which is lack of access to voting, right? Like, so I personally waited in line over an hour just to cast my vote on Election Day morning. It's been a tradition for our family. We do it as a group. And the fact that, that there's such a limited window combined with such long lines really disenfranchises voters up and down the state. I mean, I personally experienced while we were waiting, lots of folks who have jobs that they have to be at a very specific time, nurses that would come up, see an hour-long line and say, I just can't do it then. And the fact that we don't have real access to early voting in Kentucky, and the fact that Election Day isn't a holiday, and the fact that like the folks who there are just too many people that are working and unable to take off. I mean, we had discussions with employers all throughout the day to remind them of their requirement to allow folks to be able to take off 4 hours to vote. It's just a shame that we put up so many barriers for people to have access to do their fundamental rights.
So many states have changed and almost swung to the point that you can vote months early, and then something might happen with a candidate. You maybe wish you would have changed your vote, but yet will that window open a little bit here, Mac, in Kentucky? What do you see happening with the state? Might there be some type of change to allow a bigger window and more opportunity that Ben's talking about?
Personally, I wouldn't have any problem with that. I mean, I know a lot of people who will put in absentee ballots. You're only supposed to do that if you're out of the state or something, but I know a few people who fill it out just because out of the convenience of doing it. Yeah. The downside of voting early is things happen, things change, and all of a sudden you learn information about the candidate. That's an individual choice, and I think people ought to have the right to make that decision, personally.
I am really excited to hear that. I think that's a really big deal. And I look forward to hopefully our Republican legislators and governors will hear that as well, and hopefully plan to make some changes.
All right, we'll see if that happens in the next session. Joe?
Thank you, Scott. I'm Joe Arnold, and Keith Larson and I, both board members of Louisville Forum, will be asking some questions. If we haven't already collected them from your table, please let us know, and we'll come around and pick them up as the discussion continues. We have two questions I'm going to combine, both dealing with, for both of our panelists, as well as both dealing with young voters. I'm going to read them verbatim. Young people who haven't voted yet are not sure how to register, Republican or Democrat. What can you tell them about deciding which party to register with? And secondly, there has been a huge emphasis nationally to get young people to vote, registering them early. What are the parties doing to reach this group? So again, A, convince us, and B, what are you doing about it?
Start with you, Ben.
Well, look, the Democratic Party, we're a big tent party, right? We believe in, we have Democrats across the state who believe very different things on very different key issues. But I think we all agree on some basic tenets that everybody in Kentucky should have access to health care, that nobody should die for lack of access to that, that everybody who works for a living should make enough money to put a roof above their head, put food on the table, be able to retire at some time, and that everybody should have access to a good quality public education to allow themselves to develop into whatever it is they want to. And so, I think that message really resonates with folks young and old. I mean, you talk to kids now who are approaching college, and they have some real concerns about the long-term viability of their student debt versus chosen professions. And yes, we're reaching full employment across the state, but that doesn't mean a lot of those jobs are very good paying jobs or that provide a lot of opportunity. And, I think that, that combined with the kind of rhetoric and kind of us and them mentality that often comes from the other side really causes, and you see it nationwide, that more and more younger voters are either registering as Democrats or independent.
Matt?
Well, it's interesting, registration, if you go back 10 years since President Obama was elected, there have been 500,000 people who've registered to vote in Kentucky. So that's an incremental 500,000 over what we had before. Out of that 500,000 in the last 10 years, 74% of them have registered Republican, and only 5% registered Democrat. And if you think, well, okay, that was 10 years ago, and that's a whole lot of people. If you go back 3 years, when Governor Bevin was elected, and you look at the registration, all of a sudden it's 77% of the people have registered Republican, and only 3% of the Democrats. And then when you go back and just say, well, what about the last 2 years with, President Trump? You find out that it's gone up to 78% Republican and 1% Democrat. Registration is happening. We're enjoying a lot of growth in registration. Sadly, the Democratic Party, well, sadly for them, Democratic Party has fallen below the 50% mark, and in the last 10 years has lost 7 points in registration. We got counties turning red, 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 red. Now, I will admit, Jefferson County isn't one of our starring counties, but we're working on it. And registration is important, and why do people register one party or the other? I agree with Ben. It's based on values and what people are doing. And that's what it's about, is people are seeing the jobs that they're getting, and they're recognizing the business opportunities that are coming into this state. They realize that this party is at least addressing the critical problems that were never addressed before, and that's one of the main reasons why they supported us and have voted for us. So I think one of the big metrics in it's been happening in this state is the registration.
Keith?
Thank you. We've been getting a lot of questions about the rural-urban divide in the country. It appears to be growing both in Kentucky and nationally. For each of you, what is your party doing to address this issue, and where do you see it moving forward?
All right, Mac, we'll start with you on this one.
This is a real issue. And I don't know that it's just even a party issue, quite frankly, but we definitely saw a divide in this election, certainly not only in Kentucky, but across the country. And part of that was driven by rhetoric, which, as I said before, needs to be better. I couldn't agree more on that. But I think this is more of a cultural issue, and we need to find a way to help the people in the rural areas understand the problems that are going on here in the urban areas. For example, charter schools. We don't really need charter schools in the rural areas. Schools out there are very good. But down here in Louisville, yes, we need charter schools. And sadly, the people in the rural areas just don't understand the charter school issue very well. At the same time, we in the urban area need to understand the issues and the problems of the rural areas, and we don't. So to me, there really needs to be a getting together of both groups, of the leaders in those groups, and figuring out how do we help the voters, the people in our communities understand each other. So I think it's more than just a political issue. I think it's a cultural issue.
You know, I think there's some truth to it, but I think here in Kentucky we saw some counter narratives to the rural-urban divide as well. Yeah, we did. We had some great wins here in Jefferson County with a couple state house races flipping, with some great work by the Jefferson County Democratic Party and a lot of the electeds who are people who put their names up to vote here. But we also won 3 seats in Eastern Kentucky, and we also flipped 3 seats in Eastern Kentucky, and flipped 2 in Western Kentucky as well. And so, you know, I think there is absolutely a transition, and I think everyone is very clear of that, of like what Kentucky coming to realize it is a conservative state, right? And we've always been a conservative state, and it's just, I think, changing around the edges there. But I think that what we saw is that they, as we get young, as more and more young voters get engaged and more people get involved, and get excited by candidates like Amy McGrath. That has a real impact. And when she does things like puts a field office in every single county in her district to reach out to voters, and not just in Fayette and Franklin, but in Bath County and all around, that can have a real, we've got a lot to rebuilding to do. I'm not going to sit up here and say there's not, it's all sunshine and roses for the Democratic Party. We know that, though. We took a real beating in 2016 here in Kentucky, and you can't turn that around in one election cycle. And this is for us at the party, this is a multi-year process to rebuild the infrastructure needed, not just in Jefferson County, but all around the state.
Could I piggyback, Scott, because we had one other urban-rural question asking specifically about Louisville's fortunes in Frankfort, given the urban-rural split. So how will that affect Louisville's influence in the General Assembly?
Ben, why don't you start with that?
Well, obviously, the Republicans have a supermajority in both the State House and State Senate, right, in the General Assembly. And I think that with those two in the governor's mansion, it's pretty clear that they're going to continue to put forward their kind of anti-worker, anti-middle-class agenda. And, unfortunately, being that most of the representatives now from Jefferson County are in the minority party there, that's going to be a tough role for a lot of them to play. But, I think what we're seeing, and you're already actually seeing this in some of the headlines, is that when you do have that power in the state legislature, there becomes factions quite quickly with those groups. And we saw that with the pro and anti-Bevin parts of the Republican Party last cycle. And I think that when those kind of opportunities present themselves, there are plenty of folks who understand that then the Democrats become the swing vote in many of those issues, and that's what always causes the interesting fireworks for session.
Mac, I'm sure you've got a response to that.
First one is ouch. Number one, our governor is from Louisville. Our speaker is from the Louisville area. We got a lot of good representation in Frankfort. People don't remember the work that's been done in helping the Yum Center and their financial issue. That started in the Senate. Thank you, Robert Stivers. U of L mess, that was addressed and has been helped out tremendously by Frankfort. There's a lot of things that Louisville is getting from Frankfort. Now, do the dollars go the right way, or do we get more than we put in? Probably not. We're the engine that drives the state. I will also say when you talk about anti-workers and whether the Republican Party are anti-workers, boy, they didn't say that on Tuesday. I think we saw the fact that people have worked and they voted for us because they know that we are helping the workers. If you think about it, unemployment is at its lowest level it's ever been in history. 42,000 jobs have been increased in the last couple of years, which is a phenomenal number in this state. And at the same time, wages have been going up. I think Kentucky was in the top 5 of wage increases in the states in the United States. And so I don't call that anti-worker. I think we're doing a lot. When Governor Bevin puts $100 million into the budget to do workforce development, that's not anti-worker. And quite frankly, he's done it, I believe, 2 budgets in a row. We're doing a lot to try to build this state and trying to help pull the state out of poverty, which it's been, and I hate to say this, but it is so sad. You go to Eastern Kentucky and you see 80% of the population on Medicaid. If you don't think we have a problem with pensions, the Medicaid problem is huge and it is coming at us. And if we don't do something to get people off of Medicaid and get them good jobs, this state is really in trouble.
Ben, you want to, this is a good one, so you want to respond to that?
No, I mean, I do agree. Like, we have some fundamental problems with the economy in Kentucky, and you know, I think that's a real challenge for it. I mean, there are areas of the state where the current, you know, yes, economic development dollars are pro-worker, but what they really are is tax cuts for the companies to try to entice them to come to the state. And some of them come just as long as their tax incentives are there, and then leave. And we saw that, you know, just recently in Central Kentucky. And, you know, I think, look, creating, like, the idea that we have so many jobs out there, yes, unemployment is very low right now, but a lot of those jobs, wage growth is just not keeping up, I don't think, with I mean, the fact that so many folks have to have multiple jobs just to be able to afford rent and food is, it's really sad.
Mac, any one last response on that?
No, I just think you need to look at the stats a little bit closer, that's all.
Okay, let's go to Keith.
This question is for Mr. Self. This questioner wants to know, where were the teachers on Election Day? If the teachers don't come out, how did Democrats prevail in the 2019 election?
Great. I'm really glad someone answered this question, because I think this is a really false narrative that's been going around right now. And I think it's been perpetuated by people who didn't look at the numbers in quite detail. So, like, you can have one story of the election where you just look at the top line wins and losses of the election. And obviously, you know, on Election Day, we didn't get as many wins in the State House that we had hoped for. But when you start diving down and look at those numbers, I think what you see is a real impact that teachers, that the volunteers that weren't just educators, but friends of educators, public employees, our union friends had in the election. And I think there are two really great examples of those that I wanted to talk about, one of which was Stanley in Lexington, Kentucky. He's a State House member in what has been a very red district for a very long time. He won that district by, I think, 24 points, 25 points last election cycle, something like that. No, 36, sorry, last election cycle. Trump won that district by only 4 points. And so that's a legislator who was, you know, in 2016, an incredibly popular legislator that people knew, right? And the difference between Stanley in 2016 and 2018 was, you know, it was the same Stan Lee. And, you know, he ended up winning this district this time by only 1 point. So that is a 35-point swing. To me, that is the impact of teachers coming out. That is the impact of Bevin and his unpopular agenda this last election cycle. Here in Louisville, you had a similar situation with Julie Rocky Adams, right? She's very well known. Opinions on her have been set in stone. That one swung, you know, something like 20 points as well over this last district. I forget the exact number, but those are great examples, I think, that show, you know, like, these are both really red districts, right? These are not, we're not on anyone's target list to start the session or to start the cycle. The fact that they moved that much just shows that strong impact that those teachers do have.
Mac?
Yeah, no, I agree. The teachers were out there. Thing is, they voted Republican. And, you know, quite frankly, what happened, and, you know, I initially was worried about the whole pension issue, and we remember November, all that, last April. But by July, having just traveled around the state, I realized people were understanding the pension problem. And they understood that it is a $60 billion hole, and that you just can't throw money at it. You have to change the system to fix it so that you quit digging. And people learned that. And I realized pension is not going to be a big issue in this campaign, at least not against us, but rather more for us. So I agree. The teachers were out there. I just think over the course of the summer, they got away from the misinformation that they got from the unions, and they learned the real answer. With regards to the two examples that Ben put out there, He's absolutely right. Those races got tight. They were races we were concerned about and we're definitely watching. They're urban races. And for all the reasons that what happened in the urban area, I will also say Amy McGrath, again, a great candidate. They had fabulous turnout. I think Woodford County had the highest turnout of something like 61%, which again is part of that 6th district. So that race really pulled out a lot of people to do it at a presidential level. Doesn't surprise me that things tightened up. People are getting more engaged, and quite frankly, I'm glad they are.
Mac, he points to the Lee race, the Rocky Adams race as, big swings toward more blue. Do you have any districts in Kentucky that you can go, well, you know what, these swung a little the other way?
Well, I mean, if you just look at west of 65, I think there are 3 Democratic districts, House districts only. I mean, that area in the state used to be all blue, 15 years ago. It's now all red today. As far as high percentages, I'm not sure I have the stats of those off the top of my head. In elections, it's just one thing. You either win it or you don't. And you got to do it on one day. One thing I learned that was different from the liquor industry is I could go out and sell my product and they would buy it, maybe not this day or that day, but the day afterwards. Not in elections. You got to make your sale on that day. And we made our sale.
Joe?
Polls indicate that Republican voters are trending as less well-educated and lower income, while Democrat voters are trending to be higher income and better educated. How is this changing the respective political parties?
Mac, your thoughts
Mac,
on
go
that
for it.
assertion?
How education is affecting the party?
The demographics of the questioner says that Republicans are trending to be less educated and lower income. Democrats are trending to be better educated and wealthier.
Yeah,
How is that changing the parties?
Sure. This, and to some degree, this goes urban-rural as well. But I don't think we should, for 1 minute, pretend that just because you didn't go to college or get a master's degree, that you're not a very smart guy or a woman. It has nothing to do with intellect or ability. It has, maybe where they are or what they did in their life. How is it changing the party? We spend a lot of time and data or gathering data on voters. And what we've done is we've tried to talk to the voter on the message, on the issues that they're interested in. So we didn't do a cookie cutter, one line does all. I believe the thing that we saw on the other side was, don't vote for so-and-so because he will promote Matt Bevin's agenda, whatever. But it was always that one line, and it went to every House district across the state in the Democrats. We sat down, we tried to talk to the voters on the things they're interested in and really focus in and focus our message on certain key areas. And so you have to speak to people in a way that they want to listen and on the topics they're interested in. So if that's changing us, I don't know. I mean, we used to do cookie cutter about 5-6 years ago. We don't do it anymore.
I'm going to disagree with Mac on that point. I think there were 15 of our state legislative candidates that got mailings that were talking about Nancy Pelosi for those state house races, and that she had personally selected these people to run for state house. I mean, the idea that one, we've had any conversations with Nancy Pelosi. Two, that she knows the name of anyone running for state house in Kentucky is, it's the same kind of cookie cutter. Let's talk about Barack Obama. Let's talk about Nancy Pelosi that we continue to see. So, I think that that's not entirely accurate when you look across the state. I think there's actually a much closer tie between a lot of these legislators and Matt Bevin than that, especially when you're looking at agendas that they're voting on here in the State House. I think it's sad. We also saw lots of kind of almost race baiting ads across the state that were reaching out to try to really play on these dog whistle issues that I think are really don't have any kind of place in modern politics and really should be beyond the line. I mean, we had ads where they were using folks who were running for the state senate. They were using their kids in ads against them, which is just kind of lines that generally aren't crossed. And so, I think that the demographic that I actually look at more than wealth in a lot of these is the women, right? And particularly suburban and urban women and how quickly they're leaving the Republican Party. And, I think this is a result of a lot of different things between their agendas, between the idea that we've been horrifically locking up children at the border, between, all these kinds of issues that really play at folks' core morals and beliefs. And to me, those trends, when they start losing not only when you have African American, Latina, GLBT, and now women starting to leave the Republican Party, I feel really good about our prospects long term.
Ben, I'd like to ask you, we've got a few years now of data that you guys are going to interpret, I'm sure, much differently. Right to work in Kentucky. Governor Bevin said those jobs were going across to Tennessee. Now right to work is the law in Kentucky about not having to join a union if you don't want to. He touts it. I believe you've probably got a different view.
Yeah, I mean, I think that has absolutely hurt wage growth across the state, and it's hurt. You look at that in prevailing wage, and you look at that in prevailing wage, and you see that there are many jobs out there that have significantly decreased in pay over the last 2 years now. There are lots of folks who used to have a job that paid $25 an hour that are now making $12 or $15 an hour. That's had a huge impact on the economy of the state. You talk about another thing, the tariffs that have had another incredible impact on the economy of the state. You've got soybean farmers in western Kentucky that basically have soybeans that they now have to just sit on, hoping that the price will go back up before this trade war with China ends. I mean, we see that in the beer industry. Our lead time for cans went from 1 week to 12 weeks because there's not enough aluminum to get out there to even put our beer in. So, I think that there's, to me, a lot of these. Look, the economy is a macro trend thing, right? Like, you don't come in 1 year and next year the economy gets better. Trump loves to take credit for how well the economy and the stock market is doing. And when you look at the graph over the last 12 years or whatever, it's very clear that there's a trend that has continued. That doesn't mean that every president takes credit for the stock markets, the times they're in. But I think we all understand that it's a much bigger picture than simply who's sitting in the Oval Office. And so, I do think that our policies fare better for the average American in the economy.
Matt?
Well, I mean, when you talk about things like right to work or repeal of the prevailing wage or cutting some of the regulations, right to work is singularly responsible for a number of the corporations coming to Kentucky. That's part of that $17 billion economic development. Right to work is also, or repeal of prevailing wage, actually has helped employment of people because people are doing projects. We're able to build schools that we wouldn't have been able to build because they would have cost 20% more. So what we're really doing is we're building more schools. The work's out there is obviously unemployment is extraordinarily low. As a matter of fact, the problem this state has right now is unemployment. And we need more people for sure. I do want to comment a little bit about language. Language is an issue, I think, in the political scene today. I'm not totally sure how to fix it. I agree. I'm sure our people said some wrong things. I know their people said some wrong things. I don't like being accused of race baiting because that's not who we are. I don't think that's a fair comment any more than I would accuse them of saying that housewives shouldn't run for office, even though that came out in an ad before. These are things that there are mistakes made. I would love to figure out and be glad to work with Ben and anybody else that wants to figure out how to address this, because this is a problem, definitely within our system. But there are so many different kinds of people, so many stakeholders that have a hand in how the message is formed and placed and what's said. And it starts with the media as well. The media has an important role here. And quite frankly, and I'm sorry to all of my good media friends, there's more of a left agenda than there is a right agenda. And I don't think there should be any agenda at all. Part of the problem we had during the summer with all the misinformation coming out was that the media was not really covering it properly. When you saw some of the crime issues that are going on in the West End, we haven't heard anything about that. That's been going on for 5 years. We need some real work here, and it's a real problem.
Can I respond? I think
Sure.
I think that's a great challenge, and I would love to see some honest partners in some of these things. I mean, we could very easily start with things like eliminating the outside influence of money that pays for a lot of these ads. You know, the number of ads paid for by dark money 527s that are out there. That's where, in the Andy Barr, Amy McGrath race, they ran 25 ads against her, accusing her of different, negative ads accusing her of different things. And a good portion of that came from either, the leadership PACs or those outside organization money groups. I mean, you saw that in television here in Louisville, where they dropped $500,000 worth of TV ads against Linda Belcher in Bullitt County in the last 2 weeks. I mean, you probably all saw those ads. I couldn't believe that they spent $500,000 buying those at the end. If we started with eliminating that dark and soft money out of our electoral system, and then move to something like removing all of the influence of money outside of our electoral system, I think you would end up in a much better place for sure.
Matt?
I'm surprised he's suggesting that. If you eliminate Kentucky for Family Values money, they wouldn't have very much money. As a matter of fact, most of the money that was in the Democratic races came from outside. As far as the Kentucky for Strong Leadership money, that all was Kentucky money. I can tell you that right now. It's, at least I believe it was. I know some of the people who ended up giving to it. It is it's not a money issue and where the money's coming from. It's a management issue of the language and figuring out how to talk and what is a negative ad versus a contrary ad. Politicians need to be able to say, I am this way, they are that way. I support this, they support that. Frankly, in this state, a lot of the Democrats try to run as Republicans. Why? Because it's a conservative state. It makes sense. I would too. But when they go to Frankfurt, they vote as Democrats. And they don't really care about Republican values, but they don't want to tell their constituents that, and they get mad at the Republican Party when we do tell them that. And that's what some of the complaints are.
All right, let's move on. I'm going to refrain from commenting on media.
This is a question for Mr. Brown.
Uh-oh.
You said you do not like the president's rhetoric, but approve of his policies. How do you divorce the rhetoric on issues like immigration, foreign policy, poverty, and trade from the rhetoric? Will you call on Leader McConnell to finally condemn the words of the president?
I'm going to let Mitch decide on how he wants to handle or manage the situation with the president himself. So the answer to that is no, I'm not going to do that. I agree with a lot of what the president says, not the way he says it, but what he's saying on immigration. Now, what I think we ought to be doing is issuing a lot more green cards, and we need to let people come in legally. We need people to come in here and for employment. We need those people. You go out into Western Kentucky and talk to the farmers out there. They are really hurting. They need people out there to help with the work they do out there. Do I want to build a wall? I'm not in a position to say a actual wall wall is the right thing, but, virtual wall, yeah. I don't want to see people just crossing the border and walking into this country. I don't want to see people coming into this country and being let go. So I happen to agree with what's being said, not necessarily how it's being said, or at least how it gets reported and interpreted. And I'm not sure I answered your whole question, but.
Well, it was also trade on top of immigration and one other.
Okay, so, and then you may be talking about tariffs there. Look, I don't like tariffs. It certainly doesn't help our company. And it's not something you want, but there are a lot of people that believe that there's a greater good here. I also don't like the fact that you have to pay, twice the rates going into China that China has to pay here, bringing their goods in here. People think everything is starting off on an even keel. No, it's not. It's drastically skewed towards people outside the United States. And what Trump is doing is he just reshuffled the deck and he said, you're doing this, we're cutting you off. Now, again, it may not be the right way to do it in public. He has been effective in a lot of things, though, and, how you do it or how you say it is very different than what you're doing. So I can put up with the tariffs for a while, but I don't need to see the dollar getting stronger and tariffs getting bigger.
Ben, I would say to you, the Republicans would say he's been successful with Mexico and Canada with those strong-arm tactics, getting a renegotiated deal on trade. And then when it comes to immigration, Canada is merit-based, which the president just talked about. So address those two issues, the trade, the tariffs. Can they be effective in the long run, or is it a huge mistake? And what your thoughts are on immigration and the border.
Well, I would say two things. One is that, obviously, we are approaching this, both Mac and I, from the political aspect of this as opposed to the policy aspect of it. And they are elected leaders who define our policy, and it's not the role of either party themselves or party the leaders to define that policy for any of our elected officials.
Even though we know better, right?
So just with that nuanced, I mean, I think I feel most comfortable speak on how it's being used politically. And I think you all saw it very clearly when we talked about a caravan, a mass horde of people that were approaching our southern border for the 3 weeks prior to our election. And every time they were used in ads and videos, the video was grayer and darker so that the people's skin looked grayer and or darker. And to me, that was used as a very specific political tool in this last election to energize a base to try to get them out to vote. And the unfortunate thing is that it was successful in many cases. Here in Kentucky, if you look at our again, going back to the numbers, I'm a numbers guy. I really like looking at those. From the last election cycle to this election cycle, we actually had an increase in number of Democratic voters for our state house candidates statewide. That's unprecedented, going from a presidential year turnout voters to a non-presidential year turnout. So Democrats were fired up, teachers were fired up, and they were really angry about a lot of things that happened out there. The unfortunate side is that because of things like Trump showing up in Madison County and his son being here the day before and some of this rhetoric, Republicans were fired up to show up as well. And, we did cut their vote margin in half, more than in half statewide. So if this is again, a long rebuilding process. But we've got a lot of work to do. And yes, elections are one moment at one point in time, but we have elections nearly every year here in Kentucky. And what's really important for me as a Kentuckian is how do we change things for the better for the next 20 years, not just tomorrow.
Joe.
If I can combine two questions, both dealing with your roles as chairman of the respective parties. One, asking about health. What can the parties do to join forces to partner in new kinds of ways to improve the overall health of Kentuckians? The second one, what specific ways do you partner with youth political organizations to ensure continuity of leadership? So two different issues, but both in your role as party chairs.
Ben,
What's the second part?
The second one is, what specific ways do you partner with youth political organizations to ensure continuity of leadership?
Ben?
So I'll start with the health question. I mean, obviously health is, and as we saw around, the number one issue on voters' minds around the country. I think that's true in Kentucky in particular. We have over our share of health problems, particularly as you get to the eastern and western parts of this state, where our rates of things like pre-existing conditions are far stronger, far higher than they are in other areas around the country. And so, one of the things that I'm really interested to watch and to see is now with this divided government, how do we approach that issue of health on a national scale? And is there actual interest amongst the president and the leaders to get something done there, or is there not? We obviously have some Supreme Court cases that are Kentucky Supreme Court that are going to come down, one perhaps as early as tomorrow, about this issue. But I think that a lot of those issues are going to be sent back to the drawing table, and hopefully we have some leadership on both sides of the aisles that will work together to make it a better. I think one of the biggest challenges facing the Democratic Party gets to the second question there, which is how do we continue to engage and build our youth leadership? I think as a party, one of the biggest weaknesses I see for our party, and I'm not bashful about saying it, is that we do not have enough folks who are working on these campaigns statewide that understand how campaigns are run and how they should be run. I think one of the solutions to deal with that is to engage with high school Dems, with college Dems, with the young Dems, and really reinvigorate a lot of those clubs that used to be active and were active for so long and aren't anymore. But to me, we've got to, we're going to have, we didn't talk any about 2019 here. We're going to have a larger primary on the Democratic side, I think, and all those campaigns are going to be looking for folks who know how to work in campaigns, and I think there's a shortage of those people. But hopefully a lot of and I think we're seeing this not just in volunteers. I mean, we knocked on record numbers of doors, had record numbers of volunteers this last cycle. Hopefully those people continue to stay involved and stay engaged.
Mac?
Sure. So with regards to the health, and I'm talking physical health, economic health, maybe all health, from a party standpoint, you got to understand, if you ever asked yourself, what does a party do? I mean, what's their mission? What's their role? From my perspective, we're in the HR business, human resource business. Our job is to find good leaders to be in Frankfort, Washington, local levels, and to help those leaders get elected. That's what we do as a party. Each party is going to find those people who have their political values or their values and their philosophies that match up to the party. And that's one of the good things that we have going in the United States, is because, the Republicans don't have, a corner on being the greatest people in the world. There are an awful lot of good Democrats out there, I will say. And so we need to find good management and good leadership constantly. And the needs of the state change constantly. Right now, this state is in a financial crisis. And I think the philosophies and the values of the Republican Party are really what are driving the interest of the people, because they want to see this thing fixed. And so by finding good leaders and helping them get elected is what we as a party can do to really help the health of this state, whether it be their physical health or their economic health. Needless to say. And Ben makes the point that, we're always trying to develop youth, and both parties, I'm sure, are doing that. I know we are, and I'm sure they're doing it as well. It is a constant effort that we're trying to do to get engagement. The fact is that there was something like 45, 47% voter turnout. We all wish it was 100%. Or certainly much higher than that. And engagement is critical. And the fact that it was, quite frankly, at 45% or 47%, that's at least 5 points over what it was in the last midterm election. So engagement was up. That's good.
Mac, I'm going to start with you on a real quick question here. Going to give you 45 seconds to answer this, guys. Big gubernatorial race coming up in Kentucky. Why will Matt Bevin win or not win, and who are the top 2 or 3 contenders that will surface to take him on We've heard Andy Bashir, of course, but who else? Go ahead. Mac, you're first.
Yeah, Matt Bevin will win because he has a message and a vision, and it's that simple. People understand that this man wants to fix Kentucky. This state is in poverty, and it's terrible. And he has done a hell of a lot already to pull it and move it forward into a new direction that it's never seen before. And getting that message out and helping people understand that is critical.
And contenders?
He'll probably have a whole bunch of good people. I hear Rocky is going to announce today. You certainly have Andy Bashir. And, you know, the question is, will Adam Edlin run? I don't know. I
Okay.
don't think Allison will run, personally.
All right. And Ben, to you.
Well, look, obviously we as a party stay neutral in any primary process, and I really believe that that's really important for us to do. And so I do look forward to having. I think we're going to end up with a big primary process, and I think that's a really healthy thing. I think Democrats get energized by a primary debate, especially when all of our candidates, and I believe they're really committed to this. We'll stay positive and pointing out the differences and contrast as opposed to personally attacking our folks. I think that Matt, it's going to be a really interesting race over the next year. Talking about the general election, I mean, I think you have a governor who is like the second least popular governor in the nation that is on the ballot, and we have a Democratic Party that's made up some pretty significant gains over the last couple of years, and so I'm excited for that race. I think we have an excellent chance. I think that the Republicans know it's going to be a hard-fought battle and a close battle, and it's going to be a good year.
Guys, thanks so much. Appreciate it. How about a round of applause for these two guys?
Thank you, Scott. Again, I want to thank our panelists for coming with us today and our moderator. And for each of our guests today, we're going to give them a Louisville Forum Mint Julep Cup. You may put either beer or bourbon in those, whatever you prefer. Or both. Or both, yeah, or both. And our next meeting will be held on Wednesday, December 12th. The topic of the meeting has yet to be determined, but you can check on our website at louisvilleforum.org to get an update on the program. We hope to have it set by next week. I also want to end the program on a somber note. I want to wish, on behalf of myself and the board, our sincere condolences to our former past president, Barbara Albert. Her husband passed away, so we're very sorry about that. But we want to wish her our best, our sincere condolences, and hope Barbara's doing well. Again, you can call our reservation line at 329-0111. Again, thank you all for coming today, and remember, be nice to people. Thank you.